pop culture. Understand those trends because they have such an impact on your business. If you think about the generations, especially your customers who are now beginning to spend money with you, what are they into?
You've said the biggest opportunity that leaders are missing is getting centered around purpose, values, and culture. How can a restaurant owner actually do that?
Purpose and values really keep employees clear about the why they're there. And I think sometimes that gets lost in translation, especially with the pivots that are always happening, navigating with change. And it's like, instead of this, now do that.
Nice is giving a compliment. Kind is giving honest feedback from a place of care. Why is kindness, in your opinion, such a powerful tool for leaders, especially in restaurants?
I think kind leadership, it's actually coming from a place of care and help them understand the rules, right? Like, they're not going to know unless you point it out, period.
You're literally the chief culture officer of a platform that connects people through their pets. What's the idea here?
Access to pet policies, whether it's pet time off, no pun intended, but maybe. It actually attracts more candidates. It drives a higher retention for employees. I've spent a lot of time in restaurants. I've asked thousands of employees, right? What made them stay in the first 30, 60, 90 days? And there's a couple of things. One is
you mentioned values and, kind of purpose. And this idea of purpose-driven culture gets thrown around a lot. And you've said that the biggest opportunity that leaders are missing is getting centered around purpose, values, and culture. So let's put that into practice here. How can a restaurant owner actually do that? For example, if an independent restaurant or a franchise wants to define clear purpose and live their values, as people say, right? What steps do they actually take? Give us some practical advice here.
Yeah. So I think about purpose and values really are a great compass and a great way to keep your employees, your frontline, really focused on what it is that they're working on. I think what restaurant operators and franchisees do really well is that they're clear about, here are the goals, here are the targets, here's like some KPIs we want you to hit, while we're operating the restaurant. And I think sometimes that gets lost in translation, especially with the front line and with the pivots that are always happening, navigating with change. And it's like, instead of this, now do that. If I think about KPIs for a restaurant. So I think purpose and values, while all of that stuff is dynamic and changing, meaning here's the strategy and goals for the restaurant, we know it ebbs and flows given the dynamic of consumers. Purpose and values really keep employees clear about the why they're there, right? So if I think about defining a purpose, and if that restaurant owner has a point of view for why their restaurant exists, and if I think about, not Krispy Kreme, but Chipotle, for example, it's all about cultivating a better world through food with integrity and through people with integrity. And if employees who work at Chipotle understand, we want to create a better world by making sure that we have this amazing clean food, which I think Chipotle is known about, making sure that we're always true to that whole beautiful front line, how we prepare the food, making sure that it's always fresh, that it always tastes good, and that the bowls that we make or burritos that we make are always correct, you're always going to win. So if I think about how restaurant owners define their purpose, get really clear about the why we exist in the first place. And when you hire people, help them understand that in the interview process. Not just, hey, I'm hiring you to be a cashier, or I'm hiring you to be a fry cook, or I'm hiring you to work back of the house on this. It's like, help tie it to why their role in doing that is so important to the purpose of the company. Like, I think everything gets lost because I think goals and strategies change. And then you layer on, oh my gosh, there's all this technology, or now we need to do this because we have no control of the economy and how our consumers are reacting in terms of the amount of money discretionary money they have to pay. But what employees and what owners do have control over is the purpose they defined, the why they exist. And then if people are really grounded in that, that's how they're going to show up and deliver what you ask them to do. So get really clear on the purpose for your restaurant and then tie, like when you hire somebody or
Mhm.
when you're training somebody, or even like when it's the beginning of the shift, remind them why we're in it. Because then they'll rally around that because they'll see their responsibility too and that purpose. And, I think people are more in sync. They're more of a team because they're all in this kind of common purpose together. And so I think that's just a really practical way people lose sight of like, oh my gosh, well, customers aren't showing up or whatever is out of my control. But you know what? Living our purpose is within your control.
Yeah, and it sounds like it also is, consistently communicating those values because people forget, right? You might be all in right when you get hired, and then you get into the grind of the job, and kind of, you know, you kind of stop being reminded of that. And so it almost feels like just kind of continuing to re-hit that too would be a key part of that. You know, when I think about like the way that especially frontline, entry level jobs at restaurants are, especially even in what you've experienced with, Chipotle or Starbucks in the quick service and fast casual space, it really does get a reputation of being a high turnover job, something people do just for
Sure.
a quick paycheck, an entry level way, which is good and something that people have to do at some point, right? You gotta earn your stripes somewhere, right? But like what does it take though to turn an hourly job into a meaningful career opportunity? Are there specific programs or practices that you've implemented throughout your work, like Chipotle's education benefits or
Yeah.
Starbucks' training approach, that's really you've noticed has actually really moved the needle on retention and promotion? Because that's one of the biggest challenges in the industry right now. You talk to any executive, labor is a big problem, especially the turnover nature
That's
in the
right.
QSR fast casual industry. What are some things that you've seen that have actually made a difference there?
Yeah, I think what makes the biggest difference, and let's just put benefits aside, since I know the brands that I've been a part of, they're amazing education benefits. But let's talk about the practice behind that. Look, having served over 1 million employees, I've spent a lot of time in restaurants. I've talked to a lot of frontline employees who have had quite some tenure, in their restaurants, whether it's a year, 2 years, 5, 10 years. So you think about the level of tenure and, for all of us restaurant folks out there, we know that it's a high turnover. People quit within 90 days. And so
Mhm.
I've asked thousands of employees, right? I'll call it thousands, where I've had one-on-one conversations about what made them stay in the first 30, 60, 90 days. What made the difference from what you've been here now a year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? And there's a couple of things. One is in that shorter term. So in the first 90 days, making sure that they have I'll literally call it your buddy and your best friend at work, right? Like that you have someone who is working alongside you when it feels really hard, that there's not even just one person, but the team around you that, so again, the culture and the environment that the manager is creating, I think that dynamic needs to exist in the first 90 days. It's for people to feel like they're welcome, to feel like they're part of a team, that they're in this together and they're not alone, just kind of like, here's my part, I'm going to hand it off. They need to feel like what they're doing is part of something bigger, and in this
Yeah.
case, they're part of a team. So I think the first 90 days, that's the feedback that I know I've heard consistently. It's like, well, someone kind of had their back is what I'll say. Like when they were still learning and they had this huge learning curve and it's all stressful to begin with, that they felt like they had a BFF, someone who had their back, and a team that's like, hey, we're going to put our arms around you and work side by side with you. I think from a longer term standpoint, and I'm talking about the human dynamics, there's also the role that a leader plays. And it's fun when I get to talk to employees when they say, look, I never, ever in my wildest dreams, I thought this was like a part time job or it's a side hustle. And for many, it is because they need to work 2 or 3 jobs to make a living.
Yeah.
And it's like, it wasn't until there was a supervisor, shift leader, manager, whatever you want to call the name of the role, who actually tapped me on the shoulder and said, you are capable of doing more. Have you thought about training to do this? Right. And they're like, what do you mean? I just joined this just to get an extra paycheck to kind of have supplemental income to the other income that I'm earning. And so that dynamic, that human dynamic is again beyond the 90 days of your team, your peers have got your back, that there is a leader who actually sees the potential in you and kind of creates that confidence that you are capable of doing more and giving you that opportunity to do that. So I think that's another like human dynamic thing. I think from a program opportunity, what I also know that I've learned from our frontline employees that I've had the chance to serve, it is about defining what is that career pathway. So while I joined, for this frontline minimum wage plus job, helping them understand that pathway to get from here to literally, if you want to call it a regional director, like think about multiple levels above the restaurant level, making it really clear and showing that map. I think about the
Mhm.
career map of what it takes, right, to get from here to there, and being very transparent about that so that people can say, look, I may not have a manager who's going to tap my shoulder and say, "Hey, have you thought about this?" Maybe I can also raise my hand because
Right.
maybe I've never thought about this as an opportunity. But now that I see this roadmap for what this longer term career opportunity can be, that helps people think about how do I close the gap between minimum wage and actually making a living wage. And so when you look at that roadmap of opportunity, right? So how do I get to these next levels, which then translate to a general manager role, at my restaurant and then maybe above restaurant level role? How does that translate into also a living wage? Because what I love is, look, I've met a lot of employees who, once they have seen that combination, they've experienced all of that. And now all of a sudden they're a restaurant general manager. And who knew a year and a half, 2 years they would get there? It actually helps create this living wage that they would have never dreamed of, from day one walking into the restaurant.
I think that's really important is showing that journey. And sometimes you have the right leaders in place, and sometimes your leaders aren't going to be those people that tap them on the shoulder. But I love that you highlight the importance of that leadership in there, of how much better you can be set up as a company if you have good leaders under you, and good leaders who are able to recognize that talent. And it kind of leads me into a question I've been excited to talk about, because
Okay.
I'm very passionate about this. And when I, was kind of prepping for this became one that I was really excited to talk about to you, because I think it is so underrated in business and something that can be really effective. And I want to get your opinions on it because you have some really good exposure here. You don't just champion good leadership, you champion kind leadership, which you
Yes.
say, of course, is different than just being nice. And I appreciate that distinction because how you've put it, nice is giving a compliment, kind is giving honest feedback from a place of care.
That's right.
So, why is kindness, in your opinion, such a powerful tool for leaders, especially in restaurants?
Yeah, I think, look, I think it's going to resonate with people as you and I talk about this and unpack what it means to have kind leadership. I think kind leadership is about delivering feedback and about at its core caring about the person. And I think caring starts with being present, right? I think um, being present in the moment, especially if things happen so quickly in the restaurant. And when we see, I'll use the word mistakes or something could have been done differently, what I've experienced more often than not is that leaders actually hesitate to be in the moment, even if it's not exactly that moment. Let's say the shift is over. Take the time in the present to care enough about that human being to say, hey, let's talk about this shift. Here's what I thought went really well, but here's something that I think you could have done better. And let me be specific about that. Why am I sharing this with you? Because I want you to continue to be successful at this company, or at my restaurant. And oftentimes, leaders actually shy away, and I'll call it the conflict avoidant. But when you
Mhm.
ground it in the reason why you want to be so present, the reason why you want to be so timely with having corrective actions with people, right, or corrective suggestions to people, is because you care about their success. And, success only breeds further success for everybody else around you and for the restaurant. And so that's what I mean by kind leadership. It's actually being present in the moment, not present for 30 days from now and go, oh, I should have said something. And now that's even more friction because they thought that what they were now doing all along and repeating was correct.
Yeah.
And you didn't do them a service because it's like, well, you didn't care enough to actually point it out to begin with. And so that's what I mean about kind leadership. It's actually coming from a place of care, coming from a place of really setting that person up to be successful and help them understand the rules, right? Like they're not going to know unless you point it out, period.
Yeah. That's why you're the leader.
That's right. And it's also a form of respect for the
Absolutely.
human being. Like, be respectful. Again, that's why I say it's easy. Be present in the moment when you do that versus, oh, I remember all these things that you did incorrectly. And now you give them the time to kind of repeat that incorrect behavior versus like give them the respect as well to let them know the secret that you're holding like way up front because it's going to make everyone successful the moment that you do that even faster.
Yeah, I totally agree. Can you share a time
Yeah.
when leading with kindness, in these examples, meant making actually a hard or unpopular decision or having a tough conversation for the good of your people and culture?
Actually, probably leaders can relate to this. I think when a leader allows the team, so I think about the team, the front line, or an executive allows a leader and to actually continually show up not in a great way. And now it's coming to a point where uh, you have to like make the call. I think it's just demonstrating, make the call on like, how do you actually help that person and say, we need to have this really tough conversation. But it's not even a tough conversation. I think about sometimes the role might outgrow the human being, right?
Mm,
I think companies are growing so quickly. And actually, I can use this example because I've seen it happen over and over again, especially when, you're working in a high growth company. Every year, the volume continues to go up. And then even while might, the name of the role might be the same, I'm going to choose a role of like shift or manager. And that shift or manager goes, well, what do you mean? Like, I performed exactly the way I performed last year. And what do you mean I'm not excellent this year? I'm only good. And I'm trying to use an example. And I think kind leadership is also saying, hey, look, I know that you're in the same role and the business has grown. And so now this is about having a conversation around your capabilities also need to grow with the business. And so that's when I think you have to have a really kind conversation. So it's not so much like in the moment they did something bad, but then in the aggregate, as as your company or your business grows, you're realizing the capability of the person in the role needs to keep up with it. That's when you need to have that really honest conversation about let me be kind and say, right? Not like, hey, you're not performing. The reason why you're not performing is the capabilities required now in this role as manager, I'm just going to choose that name, has also grown because our business has grown. Let's have a conversation about that. And actually, it doesn't need to be one way. I think part of setting it up in that way, and that's just where I've seen it really work, is like this is now a conversation where you invite that other person, once you share your point of view, because I'm being kind around, hey, the organization has grown. My point of view is that this role or the organization might have outgrown your capabilities in the role. Here's what I think is missing. What do you think? Let's talk about it.
that whole "what do you think" is good.
Yeah, but it's also not this one-way conversation. I mean,
Right.
this is a whole other topic. It's really about, we're all adults here. I mean, clearly we're all working together. Invite them into this conversation and actually, you know, have trust in them that they're going to have a point of view about it, right? And also be open to they may not have the same point of view, but I think that's where being kind and that's where having this conversation really helps.
You're literally the chief culture officer of a platform that connects people through their pets. So,
That's right.
what's the idea here? How do pets and animal bonding tie to workplace culture and well-being? Because I can imagine in an office setting, dogs in the workplace might boost morale, but could something like that ever translate to the restaurant world? Talk to us about what's going on with your current role.
Absolutely. So let me talk about Wolf World, and it is about a platform and actually these turnkey solutions to create well-being, trust, and connection in the workplace through the power of pets. And there's a couple of statistics. So first of all, only 7% of companies in the U.S., according to SHRM, allow pets in the workplace. So this is not about dogs in the office. This is about recognizing that it's almost 70%, and it's consistent. 70% of employees actually are pet parents, right? So if you think about that, there's 2 times more pets at home than there are children under the age of 18. And if you think about Gen Z, their definition of family, and then if you also think about like Gen X and even older, they're empty nesters, their definition of family is their pets. And in this world where there's so much divisiveness happening and there's a lot of rules around what you can and cannot talk about in the world of inclusion, I'll just use that word.
Mhm.
Pets are like this common denominator where it actually, the conversation about them really connects people at a human level. And so, um, fast forward, how does that apply into these large enterprise companies where we work with them? So, it is about helping companies have pet friendly policies and benefits. So much like there are policies and benefits for your human family, do you have them for your pet family? Because there's all these statistics, whether it's the Mars Global Studies, there's data in Fortune that shows when companies provide access to pet policies, whether it's pet time off, no pun intended, but maybe on like adopting
PTO?
healthcare for pets, yeah, PTO, even bereavement for pets and or they have access to some kind of pet care or pet benefit, it actually attracts more candidates. It drives a higher retention for employees because there's an acknowledgement that pets are part of family. And then beyond that, we have found that when you connect leaders and employees together through the conversation of pets. So imagine in your company that, and yeah, it could be we have companies that are franchisees and they have frontline employees, and there might even be like a town hall where it's a conversation about the company, but then much like you experienced my pet behind me, that they're able to actually talk about pets. And it's interesting too that when you get leaders in these conversations talking about their pets, they feel more comfortable sharing that side of them than about anything personal about them. And it
Mm,
instantly
yeah.
humanizes and creates this human connection with employees. And if you think about it, for this audience that we're speaking with, I get it. Like in restaurants, pets, dogs are not allowed inside the restaurant. It's a health issue, right? But then a lot of these restaurants also have patios. They provide dog bowls, they provide places to leash up your dog. So it's part of the guest experience that you also recognize that guests or that pets are part of their family. And so, yeah, Wolf World has been interesting, first starting off as an advisor, but then now being chief culture officer. How do you put pets at the center of creating culture at a company? And this is a way that people engage at a very common level, which is through their conversation of pets. So it's been really fun working with these actually really modern brands that you would really recognize just because pets now are a thing. And for many organizations, they have such a huge Gen Z workforce. And Gen Z currently over indexes on how much they spend on their pets over any
Yeah.
other generation. And speaking of generations, it's a way of connecting these 5 or 6 generations. Like there's one organization we work with, they have employees that are 15 to like 94 in their organization.
Oh my gosh.
And it's fun to see them talk about pets.
Yeah, I mean, you made a great point. I mean, the majority of your employees probably have pets, and it's a
Yes.
meaningful part of their life. And you shouldn't ignore that, whatever industry you're in, right? But more specifically in the restaurant industry, figuring out ways to be more accommodating could potentially affect retention and your employee happiness.
I mean, it's not only employee happiness. I think you have happier pets, you have healthier employees because, their pets force them to move. Also, they are this form of comfort, especially in times of stress. So when I think about mental well-being, this the data is out there around, pets as part of family actually help reduce significant health claims. So again, to your point, it's not just happier employees, but healthier employees.
And better functioning employees.
Yeah, and better functioning employees. So just recognizing that.
Take it back. I mean, you speaking of stress, I mean, it takes us back right back to the restaurant industry a little bit, right? Because
Yes.
there's a lot of stress for everyone kind of involved in that because it's a bit of a stressful industry. You can't say it's ever boring. And I think that's something I do appreciate about the industry. But when you mentioned all those, the generations that, come through that you've seen even come through the workforce and have seen how, those generations have changed in their needs, what they care about. Think about that, taking a generational view. These folks have lived through a lot of different types of,
Yes.
events like the Great Recession or the pandemic, which are really impactful to this industry. I want to kind of finish on this because we got about time for one more question. When you look ahead 5 to 10 years, putting yourself back into the restaurant context,
Mm.
what do you think the restaurant workforce will look like? How will roles and expectations evolve? And what should operators start doing now to prepare?
Oh, wow. Yeah. I think it brings us full circle because we talked about values versus technology and AI. I think, there's companies already that are moving towards that way. I think about this amazing work. And again, I'm not an employee of them, but having been a customer of them, you think about like Sweet Green in the digital kitchen. If you've ever been there and like
Mhm.
how really automated kind of the back of the house is so that the front line can really focus on building the right bowl or dish for their guest, for their customer. So I think that truly is the future as much as possible in the next 5 to 10 years, especially for restaurants, to the extent that a lot of the prep work and the harder work can be automated. And actually it probably applies too for vendors and people that you work with to the extent that you can remove that friction behind the scenes in the restaurant. What that means for the workforce is a couple of things. It's about creating a work like hiring the right people who actually want to learn, right? Who are doing like these daily tasks that you show and tell, but it's also going to require people to be able to think on their feet.
Change is not slowing down.
Yeah, changes are not slowing down, but it's part of the job design to help people not only train against what you're expected to do, but have some flexibility for people to make decisions and think on their feet and give them the freedom to do that. And so, I don't know if that's answering the question, but I think the workforce of the future, it's beyond like the rudimentary skills that you're training, but you're also wanting to hire people with some pretty good decision making and cognitive skills, and I think always, always an orientation of service. That's never going to change.
Yeah, customer focused orientation and service. But I agree. I think the pace of change is going to increase, and you're going to need folks who are more capable of handling and absorbing that change and actually starting to thrive in it. And
Yes.
the people that you're looking for. Because if you're thinking as an organization, wow, there's a lot of change right now, I can only imagine that's going to speed up as technology continues to advance.
Yeah. And it's going to change the profile of, again, the manager of that general manager of the restaurant.
Right. That skill might outgrow.
Yeah. The role of the leader and the ability to actually create that kind of trust, with their team to have that freedom to have the judgment, and I think that's different than today because it's like an execution kind of culture versus like a thinking and decision making kind of culture that you need to have the space to create, with the teams.
Yeah, I think that's really good. Would you be able to leave us with three books, podcasts, resources, something you found insightful the last couple years that's shaped your views that you think other operators, business owners, folks in the restaurant industry should check out when it comes to people?
Yeah. So I'm such a nerd and I'm going to sound like a nerd when I say this. I am it's part of my ritual and routine every day to turn on CNBC just to understand generally what's happening in business, right? Squawk Box, Squawk on the Street. And while it's not all specific to restaurant, it's really pay attention to the trends that are happening across industries that are impacting kind of consumer spending. And so
Mm.
it's important to fill your head with things not only specific to restaurant, but to what's happening in the economy and what's happening with customers. So CNBC is a ritual for me to have that on like Monday through Friday, except for on holidays, they have repeats of shows. But I think that's an important resource that I lean on every day. And it's not just the singular in the day, like, hey, what did I learn? Begin pulling together themes that you're seeing and hearing,
Mm.
across that. And then what does that mean to your industry and specifically to restaurants? So that's one resource that for me is ritual, right? For me to do that. I think the second thing that I found really handy, and it is again, it's like a newsletter that shows up subscribe that I subscribe to, and it's PwC Insights.
Okay. Yeah.
PwC Insights, they actually have a great newsletter. Again, what's happening across industries. There's sometimes a deep dive on people, which I think is really good. But pay attention to the white papers that they send out. And again, it may not be specific to your industry, but I guess what I'm saying, again, it's a theme with me. It's how I choose to practice diversity, like seeing through things through a different lens. And then how does that apply to what's in front of me from a restaurant standpoint? That's been a really super helpful resource. And then the third one, you're going to laugh, but I'm going to say this because it's just so me. It is pop culture. And here's what I mean by that. Um, there's some great reality shows, and I know sometimes we all need to take a break,
Yeah.
right? But I think it's the culture of the reality show. And here's what I mean by that. And this was great. So, Love Island, I know is huge, especially with Gen Z and the next generation. And it was so super relevant to a brand that I'm on the board of. And, there was an LTO that happened very quickly because it was related to the finale of Love Island,
Right.
or it could be related to Taylor Swift getting engaged, right? So when I say pop culture, understand those trends because they have such an impact on your business. And so, how is your business also kind of riding the wave of, I say, this pop culture fluency, like being able to do that? Is really important. So I'm not saying go out there and watch every reality show, but if you think about the generations, especially your customers who are now beginning to spend money with you, what are they into? They're not
Yeah.
they're not going to listen to all this business stuff, but there is like an unlock there to understand their behaviors and how that ties to how they're going to spend money with you.
Yeah, I think that is great advice. Keeping your finger on the pulse of what's going on
Yeah,
in the world because you can help it understand how it's going to relate to your business, but it's going to affect your business no matter what because that is the winds of the culture and the way that business is moving. I think that's really good advice, Marisa. And
yeah,
you're the first person to actually go that way, and I'm totally with you. You got to find your daily newsletter. You got to keep your finger on the pulse, even if it has nothing to do with your business at some point it might relate to your business. So knowing what's going on is really important. That's good advice.
I mean, I think, I do love it when I hear recommendations like, "Here's this podcast," or whatever. It's also limiting, and what I mean by that is you can't one size does not fit all, I guess is what
Right.
I'm trying to say.
Narrowly focused.
Yeah, and when you're able to actually understand what's happening today and broadly, and then take the time to translate that for what that means for you, I think that's really important.
I love that. Marissa Andrada, thank you so much for your time. This was a really good conversation, and I've loved getting to know you. This has been really good and really helpful for me, and hopefully for all of those listening. I have no doubt that it will.
Well, I've really enjoyed the time, and anytime, I'm happy to be of service.
Restaurant Reset is sponsored by Genius for Restaurants, the modern point of sale system from Global Payments. Genius helps you reach your most important goals, whether that's simplifying your operations, speeding up your checkouts and table turns, easily expanding into new locations, or building loyalty with guests. To find out more, visit globalpayments.com/genius.